Picture a map of Africa in your mind. Now imagine the familiar French footprints on that map slowly fading, one after another, like lights going out along a coastline at night. In Mali, the French flag is folded and boxed away. In Burkina Faso, the last convoy rolls past cheering crowds who are not saying goodbye but saying good riddance. In Niger, the airbase goes silent and the aircraft lift off one more time, heading north. In Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire, the big, permanent bases that once felt immovable are reimagined, scaled down, or set to be handed back. None of this is happening in a single dramatic moment. It is happening step by step, base by base, agreement by agreement, relationship by relationship. If you have ever wondered why this retreat is unfolding now, why it took this long, and what it means for Africans and for France, stay with me. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the bigger picture, the small details, the historical ghosts, the new players, and the choices that lie ahead. Let's start with a simple truth that is often uncomfortable. France's presence in Africa was never only about defense or development. It was also about history, networks, money, and influence. For decades after independence, the architecture of relationships between Paris and many African capitals was built on a system people call Francafrique. It connected presidents' offices to Parisian salons, officers' messes to French training academies, and state companies to private interests. The public language was friendship and partnership. The private reality, often, was leverage and dependency. This is not a conspiracy. It's how empires unwind, slowly, unevenly, and with a long afterlife of habits and incentives. Security was the most visible pillar. When Islamist insurgencies spread across the Sahel, France intervened hard. Operation Serval in Mali was a lightning strike that stopped jihadists from rolling into the capital. It was followed by a much bigger, longer mission called Barkhane that stretched across multiple countries and years. The early victories were real. But the war kept mutating. Militants learned, regrouped, exploited local grievances, and moved into rural spaces the state barely governed. The longer the mission lasted, the more people on the ground asked a painful question: if thousands of foreign troops are here and billions are spent, why are our villages still unsafe and our roads still dangerous? Those frustrations mingled with domestic politics. Coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and later Niger brought in leaders who defined themselves against the old order. Kicking out the French became a symbol of sovereignty, a signal to the street, and a promise that a new path was possible. For many ordinary people, the question was not whether they loved France or hated it. It was whether the foreign security umbrella worked. If it didn't, then why keep it? At the same time, Paris began rethinking its own approach. French leaders said the era of managing African politics from Paris is over, and they promised a partnership built on respect, humility, and joint decision-making instead of permanent, heavy footprints. That was not only a moral argument. It was also strategic. The cost of being the central lightning rod in a complex insurgency, amid rising anti-French sentiment and a social media ecosystem full of disinformation and nationalist pride, was simply too high. Gradually, the language shifted from our bases to shared facilities. From we lead to we support. From open-ended missions to time-bound cooperation. Now let's get specific. In Mali, political relations broke down after the coups. France ended its long Barkhane deployment there and pulled out. In Burkina Faso, a similar story unfolded. The government told French forces to leave, they did, and the tricolor came down. In Niger, a dramatic standoff after the coup ended with France deciding to withdraw. All of this signaled a trend. When host governments turned decisively away, Paris accepted it and left rather than try to force a relationship that had become toxic for both sides. But something else was happening alongside the security story. The economic web that tied many West and Central African countries to French firms also began to loosen. One of the biggest logistics empires on the continent, built over decades through ports and corridors, was sold to a Swiss shipping giant. In uranium-rich Niger, the long French role in the nuclear supply chain ran into political turbulence and licensing battles with the new authorities. These are not symbolic changes, they shift the flow of rents, the power of gatekeepers, and the leverage of states. Each deal that changes hands, each permit that is granted or revoked, rewires the map of who owes whom. Currency is another fault line. In West Africa, the CFA franc system tied 8 countries to a euro peg with historic French backing. Reform was announced with fanfare years ago to rename and partially modernize that system, and a wider regional plan for a new currency was revived. The promise was autonomy and respect for sovereignty. The reality has been slower and messier, paused by pandemics, politics, and economics. Still, the debate itself matters. It tells you that the era of silent acceptance is over. People now demand to know who sets the rules for money, who benefits, and who decides. Soft power, media, language, culture, education was supposed to be France's unshakable advantage. And in many places it still is. French universities are attractive. Francophone television, music, and literature travel easily across borders. Development agencies still fund schools and clinics. Yet soft power is not a force field. It can be drowned out by anger when people feel the security situation is worse, the economy is squeezed, and the old colonial wounds are scratched open by new humiliations. A student who learns in French is still a citizen who wants dignity and results. Meanwhile, new actors moved in. Russia stepped forward with a stark offer: trainers, fighters, equipment, and messaging support without the political lectures Western partners often bring. China deepened its role as a financier and builder of infrastructure. Turkey sold drones and signed military and commercial agreements. The Gulf states invested in ports, real estate, and agribusiness. Each of these players speaks a language that is appealing to leaders who are tired of conditionality. We will do a deal, and we will not hold a press conference to tell you how to run your courts or your elections. Of course, those deals come with their own prices and risks. But for governments looking for leverage against old partners, they are useful alternatives. Public opinion also evolved. Big demonstrations in Sahelian capitals carried slogans that were raw and emotional. Some of that anger was organic, rooted in grief after massacres, displacement, and fear. Some of it was amplified by online campaigns and information operations. In politics, both things can be true at once: real frustration plus strategic manipulation. The effect was the same. The French presence turned into a magnet for blame. Even successes looked like failures because the narrative had slipped away. So why is France leaving step by step? Because the costs of staying under the old model became unsustainable, and the political mandate from host countries evaporated. Because Paris recalculated and accepted that a smaller, quieter, and more conditional footprint is smarter than being the face of a regional war it cannot win alone. Because African politics are changing, and new partners are available. Because economics and logistics are shifting under everyone's feet. And because history, that long shadow, is finally being forced to share the stage with new realities. Now, what does leaving look like in practice? It is not simply a convoy crossing a border. It is the renegotiation of defense accords so that training continues but permanent garrisons end. It is handing over camps and equipment to local forces. It is replacing direct operations with intelligence sharing, shorter rotations, and exercises. It is moving assets to coastal hubs or to Europe while keeping liaison teams and special operators on call for specific missions, if and only if invited, and under new rules. It is also a diplomatic pivot: more time with civilian ministries and private sectors, less time in uniform. And yes, in some countries, it is a full shutdown and goodbye. Consider Senegal, historically one of the closest partners. The new leadership placed sovereignty at the center of its message and said permanent foreign bases were no longer compatible with national pride. France accepted that decision and prepared to end a continuous presence that dated back generations, while keeping space for future cooperation in training and intelligence. Côte d'Ivoire, the big hub on the Gulf of Guinea, moved in a similar direction, announcing a drawdown of French forces while emphasizing that the political relationship continues. In Chad, another long-standing anchor, the security arrangement was reworked and French troops departed after the defense pact was terminated. Each case has its own local logic, but the pattern is unmistakable. Heavy, permanent presence out. Lighter, conditional cooperation in. Does that mean France is gone from Africa? No. It means France is learning to be present without being dominant. It means that African governments are learning to say no to old habits and yes to a more transactional menu. It means that the balance of power in the information space matters as much as the balance of power on the battlefield. It means that if local governance does not improve, if rural communities stay marginalized, if corruption still eats the budget, if justice is absent, no foreign partner will fix the problem, and any foreign soldier will eventually be resented. Let's also be clear about risk. The security map of the Sahel and parts of coastal West Africa is fragile. Militants watch for gaps. When foreigners depart and local armies are stretched, there is a window for expansion. Russia's state-linked formations offer muscle, but their methods can be brutal, and their focus is often narrow: guard the regime, secure mining sites, and control key roads. That can bring short-term gains but also long-term backlash if civilians suffer and if promised improvements do not arrive. China will continue to do business and build infrastructure, but it does not run counterinsurgency campaigns. The Gulf brings money, but not necessarily governance reform. The United States is recalibrating its own posture and will not be the neighborhood sheriff. So what should African governments want from any security partner now? Limited missions with clear goals. Respect for sovereignty. Transparent contracts. A focus on training, logistics, and air mobility so local forces can hold ground after the foreigners go home. Above all, investment in the things that make villages choose the state: roads that stay open, clinics that have medicine, teachers who are paid, courts that are fair. This is not romantic. It is the lesson that keeps being learned in hard ways. You cannot kill an insurgency with raids alone. You outgovern it. What should France want if it is leaving step by step? Credibility. If Paris says the era of interference is over, it has to act like it. That means ending the wink and nod politics that defined Francafrique. It means helping to build African capacity without trying to micromanage outcomes. It means accepting that some governments will choose other partners, and that is their right. It means betting on African civil societies and private sectors as much as on palaces and barracks. It means trading the photograph of the ribbon cutting for the quiet satisfaction that comes when your partner is strong enough not to need you. There's also a story here about identity. For many Africans, rejecting the old French security umbrella is not a love letter to Moscow or Beijing, it is a declaration of adulthood. For many French people, reducing the footprint in Africa is not an act of abandonment, it is a recognition that the old role cannot be justified to taxpayers or to the next generation of soldiers. These are normal, even healthy adjustments, if they lead to relationships that are clearer and more honest. Let's take a breath and pull all of this together. France is leaving Africa step by step because wars dragged on, because coups changed the political chemistry, because anti-French sentiment made large deployments counterproductive, because economic networks are being reshaped, because currency debates are about sovereignty, because new partners are available, and because Paris is choosing to be smaller and quieter rather than bigger and louder. None of this guarantees better security or better governance. That depends on African leaders, African institutions, and African citizens. But it does clear space for a new conversation. What comes next? Expect more hybrid arrangements, short missions, training academies, liaison cells, and targeted support for coastal states trying to prevent Sahelian insecurity from spilling south. Expect more bargaining in public. Governments will announce what they accept and what they reject because that is how they claim legitimacy at home. Expect more competition for influence that looks less like a single empire and more like a crowded marketplace. Expect young Africans to keep asking hard questions about dignity, value, and voice. And expect France to keep saying it has turned the page, while being judged not by its words but by its restraint. Now I want to turn to you. Do you think pushing out a powerful foreign army makes a country safer, or only more vulnerable in the short term? If a government replaces one external partner with another, is that sovereignty or just swapping logos? When you hear promises of new currencies and new economic models, do you believe they will arrive, or do you think they are political theater? If Wagner or its successors provide quick results in some towns but create long-term abuses in others, how should societies weigh those trade-offs? If France truly steps back, who should fill the vacuum, or should there even be a vacuum if local states rise to the challenge? What would success actually look like 5 years from now for a village chief in the Sahel, for a young graduate in Abidjan, for a gendarme in Dakar, and for a mayor in Niamey? Before we close, a personal note from AfriPol Lens. We built this channel to have grown-up conversations about power, dignity, and the future. Not to cheer for one flag or another, but to trace the real incentives behind the slogans. If you found value in this deep dive, if it sharpened your thinking or challenged your assumptions, that is the point. Thank you for watching AfriPol Lens. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a long-form breakdown on Africa's geopolitics and political economy. Like the video if it helped you understand the story behind the headlines. Drop a comment with your own take. Is France's step-by-step exit a strategic reset, a forced retreat, or a necessary correction on all sides? Share this episode with someone who still thinks the story starts and ends with one country and one capital. And if you want us to go deeper into a specific case, Senegal's repositioning, Côte d'Ivoire's drawdown, Niger's uranium politics, or the currency debate, tell us below and we will prioritize it. Your engagement helps more people see nuanced content in their recommendations. Thanks again for spending your time with us. This is AfriPol Lens, and I'll see you in the next one.